everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this last lecture of the Design Research and Innovation Week. And today we have a distinguished guest with us, Meg Pagani. I'm going to introduce Meg briefly, but before that, I would like just to thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. And on behalf of IADE and UNIDCOM Research Center, we are truly grateful for having you here, and we hope that this is the beginning of a fruitful collaboration. Who knows? And so, as I said, the idea was to have different perspectives from the design field, and so that's why we send so diverse invitations to different people. And so your CV is to catch our attention. And so that's why we ask you to come, and fortunately you could find some time in your busy agenda. Well, thank you, Meg, for that. And for those that don't know Meg, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about. So Meg is an Italian entrepreneur and advisor with 10 years plus than 10 years experience in this field of social innovation, technology, and behavioral change. She worked and traveled across more than 25 countries, studying models of growth, purpose, and transformation from different cultures and ancient traditions and emergent sciences, with the goal to identify and decode ways to apply power and leadership in alignment with the principles of nature, generation, and ancestral wisdom. So you can see from this short bio that her CV fits very well in the topics that we have been discussing the entire week. So Meg, the floor is yours, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Hopefully this will work as well. So thank you for this invite. Thank you for making it work with my schedule, because I've landed back in Portugal after a few weeks of travels last night. I always want to start my speeches, especially in university, with the following thing. Did you know that? Oh, let's see. Yes. African acacia trees can warn each other of danger. In fact, and I can see there's someone in the audience already knew, they release a very specific chemical, I would say, substance that enables them to warn each other when some animals are approaching that would eat up their leaves. Why am I starting with this? I'm starting with this because we tend to think about trees as yes, of course, living beings, but not animated, not intelligent, or intelligent just to create or to follow specific functions. But emerging sciences are actually collecting quite a good number of these new perspectives on the intelligence of nature. And the reason why this is so important is because understanding that, for example, trees can warn each other of dangers the same way we would say that a human being or an animal does, makes us question the very nature of our reality. And when we question the nature of our reality, what happens is that we automatically also question our relationship to this reality. This means that we start to ask questions that apparently might feel a bit existential, but yet sound and feel very important, like what is me and what is other? How do we create value? How does our species create value, and for what and for whom? What's our role to play? The moment in which we realize that the nature that surrounds us is a lot more intelligent and a lot more functioning, sometimes even better than us in so many ways. And I always like to think, to start with this, because it is definitely something that at different levels are making us question, okay, where do we stand in the universe? So nothing like the taste of another existential crisis after 2020, I guess. This is what in culture is called a shift of paradigm. What is a shift of paradigm? For those of you that are nerds like me, you might know where this quote comes from. It comes from Game of Thrones. And for some of you that might have watched it, you might remember that there is this expression that they use in the series, which is the old gods and the new. This expression that they use there, that is just a symbol of so many others, speaks of, in fact, an old paradigm that is somehow fading away, and another one that is emerging and taking its place. And this is a very perfect, in fact, description of what a shifting paradigms vibe feels like. And the reason why I choose to use the word gods, which culturally speaking and anthropologically speaking is quite loaded as a word, is because even when we're not aware and we're not conscious about it, with our devotion, dedication, and discipline in following a very specific belief system, we do become disciples. This is something that these are words that we tend to correlate or relate to a religion, but it's not like that. It's any type of belief system. For example, in this shifting paradigm as we're experiencing right now, one of the things that we're questioning or changing our perspective on is the concept of value. We come historically from an idea of society and an idea of economy that knows very well how to put a value to a whale dead on a boat somewhere in the world, but not to an alive one that is doing what he or she are supposed to be doing in an ecosystem, the ocean. It's Ocean Day next week. Doing the work, ecosystemically thinking, that they're supposed to do. We're not yet capable to put a value on it, which not necessarily means a number on it, but to actually define how valuable it is that this living being does exactly what it was supposed to be doing. These are the types of questions that we're confronted with today, and anyone that wants to create value must sit down long enough with questions like this. If these had to be represented in another framework, so using the very well-known Campbell hero's journey, and we needed to place ourselves on where are we on that journey, collectively speaking, that's what we would be. We will put ourselves at that return moment where after doing so many things and after creating value, following the old paradigm, we're right there at the return moment, sort of thinking back, why and how did we do the things that we did? What happened? What did work? What didn't? And it's interesting because when we ask ourselves if we needed to put a date to that source, that or origin of this cycle that we're now closing, one of the most known historical period of our culture comes up. Renaissance is normally known for something very beautiful, as a part of history that has been characterized by the flourishing of arts and culture, but it is in fact also where this cycle, this idea of value that we're questioning right now, was created. Some of you might know this already, but around that time is when we discovered that it's not the Earth, in fact, at the very center of the universe, but there is a sun and different planets revolving around it, including the Earth. So to that macro level shift of perspective, as normally happens to our species, there was also a micro level shift of perspectives. Right before and slightly overlapped with Renaissance, there was a period called humanism. In humanism is where we started to form an idea when we said, well, if the universe is this wide, wild and vast and unknown land that is all to be discovered and all to be conquered and all to be somehow also controlled and known, the best and most fit living being to do so is men. And I'm saying men because, of course, at the time, especially when we look at it from the perspective of Europe, we're talking about white men from higher and privileged spheres of society, not any human being, let alone any man. In humanism, we crystallized and calcified what today we know as a belief system that was man-centered, where the man is owner of his destiny and the goal of man is to dominate nature. And when we talk about dominate nature and dominate the wild, or what is perceived to be the wild, we can only imagine what happens when the wild or the savage is a culture that we don't understand or a color of a skin that is not ours. Renaissance was nothing less, nothing more than the application of that belief system to projects, to society, to policy, and to trade. We started applying this belief system. We made science thrive because we needed more tools to control this uncontrollable unknown that we had in front of us. And especially we became increasingly obsessed with immediate reward, very much in contrast with what at the time was very defended, which is the idea from religion, monotheistic religion, that said, no, your reward is going to be in the afterlife. We started creating value, wanting the reward right now, faster and more, which today we know as centralization or extraction of value, especially from natural resources. The consequence of this, we know them today. We are at that return moment, and this is just, of course, on the side of the environment. There is, of course, a lot more on the social and cultural side of this. So the shift of paradigm that we're experiencing right now basically is going from mankind is the center of the universe and must dominate nature, to mankind is part of the universe and must honor nature. And I'm choosing honor because there is, especially after the first part of the pandemic, this sense of reverence that we feel compelled to bring back into the equation, to remember that not only we're not above nature or separate from nature, but we depend on nature. And nature, even the invisible nature of a virus, can in fact bring us to our knees. So there is this honoring and devotion, this bow to a force that we might have forgotten how embedded it is with who we are. So when we talk about social innovation, when we talk about sustainability or social impact, and we're going to talk about it quite a lot today together, we tend to use language as if this is something we're inventing, as if it's a stretch forward towards something that is still yet to be known, while instead is a stretch inward, is a stretch back, a return moment to some of the principles that during a very specific set of waves in terms of history of belief systems, we have sort of somehow lost track of. So today, what I would love to talk with you about is really a more honest conversation on sustainability and impact, because, and as I'm sure all of you are aware, we almost cannot find any environment or conference or campaign right now that doesn't have some sustainability and social impact in it. But specifically because of that, these are words that are losing their weight. And when words lose their weight because they stop meaning something or because they confuse people, because they've been misused in so many ways, it's when we lose our capacity to act for it. Because when we don't have a language for something, we cannot do anything about it. And so my goal today is to share a little bit of my not only my story, but my experience. So hopefully those words will mean something more and a little bit heavier, but in a good way, with more gravity, so that you will be able to use them in another way from now on. So first and foremost, like in every conversation, I would love to introduce myself. So my full name is Meg Pagani, and after so many years across Latin America, 5 years, and then 3 years in Portugal, my name is spelled in so many ways that please just call me Meg. I am living here in Portugal since about 3 years, but I come from a super, super small town in the north of Italy. And my entrepreneurial journey started, I would say, quite early. You can in fact see me here at about 3 years old. This is a true story. When I packed my stuff, went downstairs to my parents and told them I'm leaving. And they're like, you're what? And I'm like, I'm leaving. Something is not adding up and I just need to go and figure it out. This is a true story. I was born in a family lucky enough where my parents took this picture, my father took this picture, and they also let me get out and explore. And maybe we can, this might be one of your questions that you might have later. But this is just to say that I was very early making sure that the world would know that I would have gone my own way. Today, as I am mostly known for the entrepreneurial world and the work that I do in leadership, most people assume that I study finance. And in fact, I studied fine arts. I studied fine arts 2 years in Milan and 1 year in Bilbao in Erasmus. So this means that the type of training that I had on the topics like new economy and purpose, etc., don't really come from spreadsheets and numbers and lines of code, but from this type of lines of code. The lines of code of the stories and the codes in terms of like symbols and illustrations that we paint, in this case, or painted, in what at the time was the only place they would know outside of our home. Those stories that we keep repeating to ourselves do shape our behaviors, and our behaviors create the social and environmental challenges that we know today. So I learned quite early, and thanks to my fine arts training, that it's very important to look at the stories that we tell ourselves, so sometimes unconsciously. If we think about an environment like this, I could ask yourself, where are the leaders? Where are the leaders in sense of how they're pictured as well? Are they benevolent? Are they an archetype of a judgment-based leader? Where are the people of color? Where are the women? Etc., etc. So this is the training that brings me today to share some of this perspective with you. So you can only imagine that with this potpourri of interest, and in 2011, as some of you might know, the second big crash of economic crisis in Europe after the 2008 one, this was me after graduation, quite literally. I couldn't find anywhere, an environment or a sector that would allow me to share my interest and grow and learn with other people, of course, older than me, but without having to pick one side or the other. So for me, luckily, 2012 happened. This is when I decided to start traveling in today about 30 countries almost, studying models of sustainability, social impact, and growth. I was particularly interested in the topic of scaling impact or sharing best practices, etc. And across now today across 4 continents. That's what made me end up found one of the projects that I am leading today, which is impacton.org. The goal of impacton.org is to use technology and design, especially design of information, not necessarily too much of the technology or per se or data, to spread what already works. At the time, I became obsessed with saying, but if we do have some projects that have already been proven effective, why are we not scaling them? Which is very different, scaling an organization from scaling the impact of something that has been done. You can grow and scale an organization and get spread or diffuse or transfer in an adaptable format what already works so that other people, other actors, other stakeholders can pick it up. So really going from simple replication in sequence of what already works to the multiplication or multiplying impact. And this, of course, means that for years, me and my team, we had one leading question amongst others, which is, what are the parameters that we might look at? When we want to identify what works, when we want to understand if something is worth the spreading, considering we have a technology and a set of programs that allow any project we want to be picked up by dozens or hundreds, what is worth to be put in that box? What are the parameters behind or beyond the operational feasibility and the economic sustainability? What do we have to look at? And that's how literally everything changed for me. Because when you go through thousands of projects from all around the world that are trying to answer this question, literally from like the Impact Awards to the Google Awards to the European Social Innovation Competition, so also looking at different perspective of what impact is from other cultures, you sort of started to understand that there is a very big problem. Because we keep talking about accelerated the transition for sustainability, for social impact, for inclusion. But then when you analyze so many projects, you realize soon enough that more than 90% of these projects are in fact perpetuating the same abuse of power that they're trying to theoretically put an end to. Because we can literally decode every single social or environmental challenge to one or another abuse of power on nature, on each other, or on ourselves. And so when I started thinking about this, and I started especially strong and thanks to the experience of analyzing so many projects, I saw that more than 90% of these projects, leave it or take it, were perpetuating the same abuses that they theoretically were up against. One example is what I call the plaster projects. You might know this as aid. Aid is very important. Aid is incredibly important when we have a natural disaster or a humanitarian crisis. We do need to attend to the urgent needs of those that are suffering or that are in distress, etc. But we're not supposed, in the same way, we're not supposed to keep a plaster on a wound or on a cut for 15 years. We're not supposed to be doing aid in a village or in a community for 15 years. So the plaster projects are those projects that keep wanting to just do a band-aid, so to shut off for a while the symptoms without really going and heal or allow and hold space for a deeper transformation for the community. The second one is the Game of Thrones projects. We find this especially in activism. In activism, we find a lot of language of hate, of judgment, of pointing fingers, of trying to figure out who's the enemy so we can get to be the heroes. And don't get me wrong, way before being an entrepreneur, I've been in activism and I still am. But I do believe that there is another type of activism that is not trying to win a blaming game and is trying to raise the voice and make what is not seen or not considered visible for everybody to do something for it. Very different from just trying to point fingers and scream and break, because that is not creative, that's destructive. And even if I do understand the anger, and believe me, I do, the Game of Thrones approaches keeps destroying instead of holding space for creating alternatives. And then the last one of these 3 examples, that is many, what I call the codependent relationship projects. This is a term that comes from psychology or relational psychology when we talk about the codependent relationships, but in projects and collectively, we do the same thing. And I prepared the 3 examples for you to play a little bit of this game. So these are 3 projects, and the 3 of them have won many awards. In the first one is called Play Pump project. You might have heard about it. It's pretty known in the sector. And the value proposition of this project was to build these merry-go-rounds in different villages, in particular in one in Africa. It started there. So the kids could play and literally pump water out of the soil. And so the village would have water. And this was then replicated in many, many countries. The second one, the one that you see below, is one that takes a community and figures out local materials to build rain harvesting tanks in communities that have been affected by climate change. So they used to have a lot of rain, they don't anymore, so they need to collect it to use it a lot more wisely, both for private consumption and for agriculture. So they built with these local materials, this rain harvesting tank, very little technology involved, as you can see, for the community, for the village or the town to use. And then you have a third one, it's called Live Straw. Sorry, the second one is Sed Zero. It was applied in an intra-region between north of Argentina, Brazil, and Bolivia. And the third one is Live Straw. They basically provide these water tanks or buckets with water filters so that even poisoned or non-potable water can be poured into these buckets and become potable thanks to these water filters. The 3 of these projects are moved by the best intentions to provide access to water. We tend to be dependent on access to water as human beings. The difference though, and I would love you to raise your hand, please. Who thinks that the first project was co-designed with the community? Yes or no? Sorry. Yes, if you think it was co-designed with the community. Was the community involved in thinking about the solution? What about the second? Raising hands is really important for us speakers, like dynamic audience. And what about the third one? You guys are very prepared. The first one was definitely not designed with a community. In fact, it became known as the most disastrous project on water in the history, because it raised, at the time especially, because I think it was the 90s still, from Bono of the U2 to Madonna, like all the celebrities, it was one of the most funded projects. It was replicated all over Africa, and it was an absolute disaster. The kids cannot play when it's too hot, which is when you need water the most. The kids also wouldn't play necessarily every day, the whole day or enough. So the women at some point were needed to use these merry-go-rounds, which are very low. So they started having issues with their backs. And also the women that need to go and use a merry-go-round are not doing everything else that the women needs to be doing in a village or in a family. So also the kids were not safe, and we can go from there. The second one was in fact designed with a community. It's a program that started a lot more slowly, because it needed this engagement, it needed this co-creation process. But the moment in which a community has that water tank that is not even built by the NGO, is built by the locals, they're 100% capable of fixing it if needed, making one larger when they can, and so on and so forth. With very little technology involved, so there is no licensing, there is no hardware that is impossible to find, etc. The third one is one of the ones that are also extremely damaging, and funnily enough, the most awarded of the 3 of them. Because Live Straw historically is a company that did this sort of straws for water journalists or activists that basically could drink from mud, literally, and drink potable water. But it's different when you say there's sustainable development to put a bucket of plastic made in China with water filters produced in Switzerland, that of course, in the moment in which the bucket is broken, or in the moment in which the water filters are over, village is back, the village and the people especially are back to ground zero. This is the level of confusion that we have today when we talk about sustainable development. You would go trying to look for these 3 projects. The first one, of course, is too old, probably is nowhere to be found aside of course, the articles and the essays that I do suggest that you read. It's amazing. But the second one, I don't even know if they have a website. The third one has a very fancy website with a lot of SDGs on there. So we not only don't have a language that is clear for this shift of paradigms, but we also are pointing in what we could call the wrong directions. And the reason why I wanted to share this is because I personally consider this the most important front of work of this sector, and it's going to be for a while. Because in the age of sustainability anything or impact anything, we really need to ask if we want to sustain this. Is the point to get the CO2 out of the atmosphere and continue producing and living the way we do? Is that the point? This is one of the questions that we really need to sit down with. And in my opinion, there is really only 2 options. And I did warn you this was going to be a very heavy on movies and nerdy stuff presentation. The first one is the one that we're seeing right now. The blue pill is the social washing, the greenwashing, continuing with a language that is confusing and is confusing us and even especially the people with the best intentions. Because as we're learning, we think that the best intentions of providing water to a village is great. And it takes us sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years to figure out that we're sustaining a system that we don't believe in. And that it's very manipulative as well. The other one is the red pill. What is the red pill about? The red pill it's about understanding that it's the belief systems that we have on value, on power, of life, of leadership that create the society, the ideas of impact and the sustainability that we know. And then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The longer we have the story that whatever we do is better than nothing, the longer it will take for us to understand that that's not quite correct. That we have now enough information, as we're going to see together shortly, to do differently. This is what I call in my newsletter, which is called The Other Side of Impact, but also in my presentations, the other side of impact. So the unseen dimension of impact and sustainability as we know it today and as we learn it, which is really about going from this idea of invention, we were inventing circular economy or inventing social innovation, this new cute idea of creating value in a different way versus transformation. And as we saw earlier, going back to certain principles that our culture, different from others, we're going to see it, somehow lost track of along the way. This is literally what brought me to dive into what I call the other ways of knowing. A few years back, when I started to understand that if literally every social and environmental challenge is possible to be traced back to an abuse of power, then I thought maybe in power, it's to be found the cure. But our culture doesn't deal well with power. The same way we talk about impact and sustainable impact and purpose more than sustainability as a default positive, we think about the word power as a default negative. If I would ask you to think about people of power, the first people that you would think about are people that not necessarily, I think, share your value or you would love to be your best man or woman at their wedding. Our culture doesn't deal well with power. We don't have a great literacy of power either. Don't get me wrong, we have uncountable resources on how to centralize more power and access more power, but not how to repurpose it. And that's how I got eventually to go and dive into what I call the other ways of knowing, which really are ancient traditions, philosophers, or as you can see here, indigenous communities in different parts of the world that simply, but not simply, because we really are we're not making their life very easy, whose cultures have existed for a much longer time. So it's not that they're better. They've been through the same phases we are going through. They just passed it already. These are cultures that have gone through the phase of obsession with accessing power. They have gone through the phase of experimentation of power where we get addicted to see how far can we take it, bending and breaking and stretching using our power. But they also already got to the phase of asking, okay, we can bend and break and stretch, but do we want to? They already got to the phase that I call the conscious application of power, as we're going to see together. So I now today and since a few years spend about a fourth or a third of my time in different parts of the world, really living with these communities and listening and observing and somehow trying to translate back to non-indigenous, for example, organizations and places, what that other story of power can teach us and how can it inform our way forward. So really, especially this experience that you just saw in the pictures, the two of them were with the Ashen Inca community at the border between Peru and Brazil. This was one of, I would say, my latest experience in January. It was to go back to the roots and relearn the way of the forest or the way of nature that emerging sciences are teaching us as so much to actually inform us with. So really, if everything that we talked about it up to now is the psychology or the side of the psychology of impact, then there is what we can call the for impact leadership, the final part of this presentation. In other words, let's talk about tools and ways to make this very practical and applicable for all of us. We can think about impact as the multiplication between power and purpose, where power, as we saw together, has three phases. The first one, obsession, to access to knowledge. Knowledge in our culture is one of the main leverage of power. You can think about social media, you can think about companies, you can think about our legal frameworks, you can think about the knowledge of how to do things is what we call competitive advantage in business and the economy, and not just in the private sector. The second one is experimentation of our power, as we saw, is about how far can we take it? How much can we extract from nature? And how long can we go doing so, inventing that if we plant the trees, it's gonna be fine? And of course, it's in that phase where we get stuck with the irresistible nature of the immediate outcomes that we saw before, where destruction and the race of infinite growth literally chemically keeps us going. The third one is the one that I was mentioning, the conscious application of power. And this is really important because when we want to work with any organization, profit, non-profit, public, private, doesn't matter, or with our own self and our own life, it's not anymore about accessing power, but about how we use them. So we can, in fact, today, our species and culture for the first time, understand it is about the why, the how, and the what for. It's not about what. It's not about if we have resources or not, we have them, but how do we apply them? Some of you might know the Golden Circle from Simon Sinek. It's a very known leadership TED Talk and then books and then etc. that says, to find out your purpose, you need to start from your why, and then you figure out your how, and then your what eventually. And I get it. I get it that from a leadership, if you want, or personal choices perspective, that might work. But I'm the daughter of a psychologist and a theologian. So I think that there is another golden circle that we can apply today, literally as a design principle for anything you want to do. The why is your motive. It normally has something to do with your needs, not necessarily your goal. It's very different. The what is what you have. The how is how you apply it or how you use it. And the what for is your cause or objective or goal. There, in the how and in the what for, is where we can steer the economy, our life, or anything else. Because if you think about it, taking one of the most purpose-driven companies in the world, Patagonia, their why, making apparel, and wanting to produce and being a company, so also sustainable or profitable, is pretty similar, including the what, to any other apparel company. The machineries they use, the processes they use, the skills they need, it's pretty similar. But it's their what for, and therefore their how, that make them the company that they are today. And this same framework can be applied to steer any other organization on the planet. So, okay, Meg, but how? How do we do this? So really to conclude and to hear hopefully all about your questions, we need to remember every time that we're frustrated about all of this, that we are in fact in a moment of change. And we tend to think about change like as, going from A to B. And that works, but we sort of know that it's more like a journey. But even more so, it's not just from A to B. In fact, it's an A to T to D, where T stands for transition. This is important to remember because we tend to think about change as, okay, the old paradigm is there and I'm going for a new one. Doesn't work like that. Paradigm shifts have these like mixed waters in the middle where things don't work anymore the way they used to, and they don't work yet like the new paradigm. There is a T in the middle, and the rule of the game there is very different. And the invite for anyone that is alive in these times of paradigm shifts, none of us really chose to be here, so we might as well learn how to enjoy it better, is that we are, in fact, pontifex, bridge makers. We're not those generations that are lucky enough to have a very, good deal of stability and clear rules of the game. Being bridge makers means that we understand sooner or later that those bridges that we hope to find to go from A to B and across T are built with our steps. There is no mindset or knowledge or insight, but the types of steps that we want to, or we will choose eventually to take that will make the way. It's not that we find the way and we step on it. Sadly, it doesn't work like that. And really to remember that, as for the Italians here, la bellezza salverà il mondo. Beauty will save the world, but not the beauty of aesthetics or the fine arts type of beauty, but the beauty that we feel when we understand that we do have the responsibility, the ability to respond, and the opportunity to rethink, to redefine, to rebuild, and to return anytime we want, especially in these T moments, and really going back to the other ways of knowing whenever the ones that we applied already don't stick on the wall anymore. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for this inspiring lecture. I'm going to open the Q&A session to the room. So there's questions coming out of our audience here in the room.
I know there is a lot of material. I'm also
Yeah.
happy to go back to the slides if you guys want, or anyone that is listening also from Zoom. Don't be shy.
Last time they were shy, so I opened the questions.
We have a question there.
And then, okay, you have a question, great. So thank you. Yeah.
So the complete question I have is, what is value for you, since you started with that in the conversation? And the motivation for that question is that I'm a little bit puzzled about kind of the language and the message that you send. There is this corporate side and this activistic side, right? And
In the world or in my language?
In how I perceive your work, in how I perceive your work. I don't want to judge.
No.
So my question is, maybe by clarifying what is creating value for you, I kind of understand that better. How
this is hands down one of the most interesting questions that I was ever asked. So thank you so much. Of course, what is value? And I see two people that raised hands, so we'll get to you guys, I promise. I guess that the question, what is value, is very personal, very cultural as well. In my case, and I did struggle with it in the past, is valuable that which to me feels sacred, that which I think I would protect. I think and I know I would protect, even if no one would know that I am doing it. Has value what somehow awakens in me that feeling that is so important, that even my role or my identity or my name or my effort, I could do that and protect that at any cost, full anonymous, nobody knowing, nobody being by my side necessarily. That feels valuable. That's why I use the word sacred, because it's so hard to explain. Like it's when we try to explain beauty or poetry, like it's something that you just feel. It's unexplainable, but also undeniable. And I think your question is brilliant for another reason, which is it happens with the social and environmental challenges. They all are important. Like intellectually speaking or logically speaking, they all are important, but there is some of them that somehow touch fibers in us that sometimes we can't even understand. Like I wasn't born anywhere close the sea or the ocean, and I haven't seen it for many years after I was born. But the ocean, I was drawing the water and the ocean since as long as I can remember. So there is something about it that moves fibers in me and then makes me understand that that's very valuable to me. That value is something that, again, somehow is personal. And at the same time, not exclusive, like to always remember, at least for me, that what is valuable to me cannot be treated or protected just to following my way of protecting it. Like this idea of the commons as well. And I guess, connecting this to your second question is also very, very interesting. As I was sharing earlier, I tried for a very long time to just be either on the corporate side or on the activism side. I also was a professional volleyball player. So for about 15 years, I'm like, I don't care. I'm just gonna be doing my thing and just be a normal person because nobody else seems to care that in activism, people are violent and I don't understand it, or in nonprofits, there is like this codependency project and I don't relate to it. So I stuck my head in the sand for a few years for sure, trying to be a normal girl. And I guess this is personal because it's traceable back just to my own nature. I understood that one of my passions are languages. Not languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and whatever, of course, as well, but languages in the sense of understanding the belief system that moves the corporate value creators, with a lot of quotes, the activism value creators, the nonprofits and social entrepreneurs value creators. And because I have this more like, what it feels at least, this more universal language that goes behind how they're trying to do it, I became extremely passionate at trying to decode, not necessarily to each other for one of them to win, but to each other because I think one of the worst things that our culture and species has done in this part of the world, which by the way, indigenous communities, like when they understand that that's how we work, or monks from Tibet or whatever, they're like, that feels like a bit like a mystic school for them. It's so hard to grasp the fact that we divide everything inside us. Private is not public, and this sector like nutrition doesn't speak with healthcare, and healthcare doesn't speak with whatever. So I started being passionate about tracing some of those bridges and understanding that if we are able to decode the common denominators of what valuable and value is, it stops being about who does it better. It stops being about fighting for the same seat, 5 different sectors, and it starts being about going back to what do we have, therefore how can I best serve with what do I have? And creating these other stories as well, because not everybody needs to be a social entrepreneur for this to be a safer, healthier planet to live on. Quite the opposite. We need a lot of right hands of politicians. We need a lot of mothers and fathers. We need like so many other roles that today in the hero journey story don't find space. And so I started being passionate about if I relate to what moves all these actors and I don't quite associate or connect with how they act, maybe there is a bridge in the middle that a few of us can create. And I don't have an answer. I'm trying to do it as I go. No, thank you.
Questions. The first one is, who is your favorite character from most? And the second one is, how did we learn to do things without respect for nature and for
Man, this is the room with the best questions I've heard for a very long time. In Game of Thrones, it's so hard. So hard. One, I know, I understand. It's really, I would say Tyrion. Yes, because I love sense of humor and things like that. Like Tyrion is my favorite. Arya a little bit as well. But you said one, I stick with Tyrion. That's it. The second one is brilliant. And for any one of you that wants, because I study all the time, for any one of you that wants to hear today some of the best perspectives on how we got to be so disconnected from nature, the philosopher and mathematician Charles Eisenstein, I can also send it to you and you can send it to them if you want, is by far the best source. The books are a bit dense, but the podcast, if you look for a podcast with him, are very, very good. And this is just because he's one of the authors that to me speaks of it in the very best way. We at some point, as I was in part trying to share earlier, felt like nature, this is also when you start looking at theology and religions. We started to see, for example, fire of the 4 elements would not be present in nature. We would have water, air, and land or soil, but not fire. Fire would come in accidents, like when a storm would come and hit a tree or things like that, before we actually cracked the code. That's why the mythology or the myth of Prometheus is so interesting. We started developing an idea of disgrace in the sense of like a challenge, a disaster. We started feeling in many ways, but it was really calcified, as we saw in humanism, when we understood the magnitude of it. But in general, nature very often to some of our culture felt like a punishment led behavior. So when something that would happen that we wouldn't understand, when the winter would be longer, when the crops wouldn't grow, that when the sun would be harder, when the eclipse would come, we had this idea of threat. We also need to remember we are, which is very funny when we talk about power, we tend to forget that we are the mammals, because we still, we can behave very weirdly, but we're still pretty animals in like how we're wired. Our brain is very old. We upgraded the software, but the hardware is not holding very well. The weird mammals, they take the longest to be independent. Some might say 7 years, some might say 10 or 14, whatever. We take very much longer than any other mammal to be vaguely able to survive. Especially those of us that live in city or are born in city. I wasn't, but many of us are. I don't think we would survive on our own, and not even at 50 in a forest. This is all to say that because of that, in the moment in which we are born, we start to need to manipulate power. We start to, unconsciously figure out, okay, mom and dad come more often if I cry a lot or if I don't cry at all. Because maybe if I don't cry at all, they're worried that I'm not breathing anymore and they come more often. If my survival depends so much on the caregiving of my parents and the surrounding context of whichever nature, we start to manipulate power on ourselves. So we start to figure out and calculate how many sides of me do I need to hide for me to be more fitting? And what do I need to do to make sure that others do what I need, because I'm not able to do it on my own? These aspects makes us being extremely manipulated creatures. Another book, a book that changed my life, it's been more than a decade now, and it's still top 3. It's The Philosopher and the Wolf by Mark Rowlands. It's not known. I read it, I think, every year and a half, just because, or I open it randomly, because this philosopher really decoded the difference between the way of the ape and the way of the wolf. So socially, in terms of relationship to nature, the ape species see nature only valuable in relationship to their needs. It's not sacred on its own. That's why today, Tiokasin Ghost Horse is a teacher and leader of the Lakotas. In a training that I did recently with him, said to the class that we keep having this language of making Earth sacred again, or saving Earth or whatever. And he's like, you don't make Earth or nature sacred. It is in spite of you. What most of us are doing is that we're making it perish. Like also the perspective on impact and the types of narratives that we frame put us very often, in the hero seat. And we tend to forget that the things that we have at hand right now, we did them. We made them, most of them at least. So it's a very fascinating topic, but in a nutshell, at some point we said, we're better than nature, we're above nature. We're not nature, fully separated. And therefore nature became something to exploit for the survival, the approval, and the belonging, which is a quite scary perspective. How far can we go for that? Anyone else has questions? Otherwise, I would love to hear from the people in Zoom as well.
I would like to start something. I was trying to remember that I read, and they said that was their assumption that human species feel like we are not quite well adapted to the nature, and so they feel kind of envy when they look into the other beings in the planet, and so we tend to see us as misfits or less prepared, and so that's why we decided to change nature. So we consider that nature is not our natural environment. So I don't know if I agree with this, but this was an explanation I could get, and I was trying to remember the name of the book to share with you guys, but I don't know. But I have it with me, so I can share it. And just to add another more thing before I leave the word to those that are online, I just have a provocative question.
Absolutely, bring it on.
That we are in the transition phase, right? So
yeah.
But since we are about to reach the edge of the civilization, how much longer can we sustain this transition phase? So, do you see a way to act fast to save us all, or what are we going to do?
Okay, how much time do you have? It's a very interesting question because, as I sort of shared earlier, we have a language issue in this sector, in this shift of paradigm. One of which is, who's the enemy? So I get to be the hero, pointing fingers. They should. And don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just not effective to just stop there instead of moving to the next phase. The other one is this disaster, we're doomed, it's too late anyway narrative. And while back to being able to empathize with way more people than I like, I understand that from the scientific perspective, numbers and measurement, and if you trace on a line how change works, we're out of time. I spent enough time with other ways of knowing to understand the linearity is very much of a thing of our culture. That sometimes we're used to say, oh, it takes that long to do something. And whoever from an art or design background would tell you that maybe it takes 5 days to try to crack inspiration. But once you're in there, the work that normally is done in weeks is done in 2 days. So we need to remember to at least use these tools back to, how do I think to create value as well, to hold the space for ourselves and to bring back to ourselves the power of at least choosing a more empowering narrative. Because someone could argue that every narrative of belief is valid, but only a few of them freeze our brain in terror, literally, for the amount of complex information, because they tell us they were doomed, that we're not valuable, that there is nothing that we can do, etc., etc. Which doesn't mean to go, of course, the full naive and rainbow and unicorns and flowers and so on. So I personally think also that if we keep trying to be the chosen one, the one that says it all, we're gonna keep forgetting that nobody is the chosen one, and yet everybody is. Depending on who we are, we have a very specific set of resources and spheres of influence and connections that happen in our brain because of the uniqueness of who we are, that point us to a very, very precise role to play, but it's not the one of the savior. And I personally, but this is extremely personal, believe that the more people on the planet realize that we have our own seat or our Excalibur or our own whatever to figure out and decode, the more this impossible to explain transition, but faster than anybody would imagine, will happen. And this is what I strongly believe personally. I'm not a fan of constantly talking about how much we're doomed and that it's too late, and putting pressure on individuals on environmental footprint, which, by the way, was a marketing, some of you might know, was a marketing mechanism that was invented by corporates to put a pressure on people, which doesn't mean that we don't want or need to reflect on how much we consume and whatever. Let's put the dots on the I, shall we? That would be it. But I would love for sure to hear from the people.
I know that some attendees raised hand. Francesco Galli, you raise your hand, please.
Francesco Galli.
Yes, ciao Margherita. Honestly,
Ciao Francesco.
Ciao Margherita. Always well done. Honestly, the question is for Professor Emilia Duarte, but is also related to your presentation, because I know very well, and I know your research and what are you doing, and also you have done a great job with my students. But for Emilia, the question is this: during these 3 days lecture, you invite a different kind of perspective, no? And considering, for example, the yesterday lecture and the today lecture, that I absolutely connected with what Margherita is trying to also to envision, like the future of research. For my personal point of view, look like a contradiction between Ken Friedman approach and Margherita approach. The question is why, and what do you think about these two different perspectives? Are connected, not connected, are in contradiction, are in conflict? That is my question. And Margherita, congratulations.
Okay, thank you, Francesco, for the question. And I can tell you that that is exactly the purpose of the academia. We are inclusive to all perspectives and we look for confrontation. Because that's how we learn. We are not here to just take one side or the other. We are not politicians. So we are trying to grasp different sensitivities, different perspectives, different theoretical backgrounds. And so that, for me, it was the big issue during this week, these lectures of this week. So to offer the community the opportunity to confront different ideas and to decide which ones they want to take. It's not up to me to decide that. My job here is just to open the school to the world, and all bringing all these people, even if they have completely antagonist ideas. That was the most important thing. I don't know if I replied your question or if you agree with me or not, but that is my perspective as an organizer of this event. So I intend to keep doing this kind of strategy. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
I understand you, and that's why also after my meeting in Lisbon with you, I admire what are you doing in IADE, and congratulations, well done.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I see Ana Margarida. Yes, you want to intervene?
Yes, hi
Thank you.
everyone. So hello, Meg.
Hello.
Nice to have you at IADE. And I just want to say something to Francisco in the sense that we are all working together, and in the exactly idea of Emilia, even at IADE, we have different ways of approaching the situations in quite complementary way, I would say. So I think one of the main goals of Emilia is exactly to have it all in a way, to open broader the perspective of the students that are the main reasons for us to be together now, but also to support each other and have a confrontation situation to reflect together. So I think it's the main reason, and I think it's perfect. Meg, first of all, thank you for being with us. I just love your presentation. I'm quite in line with you, almost agreeing with everything, I must say. I also do a kind of research, applied research on social innovation, trying to achieve sustainability and exploring all the issues, and quite related and on fund of a quite nature-centric design, trying to find what it is and to see if we can rethink our mode of doing things. So just for start, two main ideas that I keep and I consider quite important. The ancient way of doing, that is looking back to understand how to do it in the future. I think really believe that it's the way also. And the image of the roots of the forest, I must love it, and I use it also. So completely in line, and I really believe that could make sense. So in a more quite provocative approach, I have two ideas that I think a lot of it, mostly because I explore also the dynamics and co-evolutionary process of the systems as a whole. And I was quite curious because I didn't find time in your reflections, because we talk about innovation, mostly about radical innovation, if we want to lead to transformations. But we know also, even when assessing these kind of models, social innovation and its impact, that times have an important role to play. So what do you think? I would like to hear something about time on it.
Time es tiempo.
Yes.
I love it. Guys, you're the best. Time, I mean, where can I start? For me, I mean, partially and in part, I was sharing of this like non-linearity of the perspective that I have for sure. And I would love to also know from you, Ana Margherita, which way you were thinking about time. But as you say time, what comes to mind for me is also like this sort of shame or guilt that we tend to have culturally, both because of these very established narratives that we're late, and not just, you know, in impact and sustainability, like in general. Like if we're taking a coffee with our best friend at 10 in the morning on a Monday, we're late. We don't know for what, but we're late. We have this very time like designed or time defined scripts, right? That by a certain age, et cetera, et cetera. But also your question on time makes me reflect on how important it is to somehow develop the capacity. And as a chronic anxious person in recovery, I can tell you everything about anxiety. How we can hold the space for ourselves to understand that there is no being late, that there is cycles and processes that fall into place. And anyone, again, creative process teaches us about that in a very humbling way. Sometimes you cannot force certain cycles, you cannot accelerate or decelerate, even if you have an idea of time that is in your mind. The only thing you can do is to read the pulse of the situation and understand that if you're stuck energetically, staying on your desk for the whole day is not going to change anything. So time to me is one of the forces that also on a personal note defined my life for so long. Because I lost a parent, I lost my father when I was very, very young. So this idea that we don't have time was extremely present in my life and dictated a lot of the reason why I had such a rush and such a drive to do things, because we have no time. And so for me, the relationship with time, we have at least the opportunity to change. Exactly like we said before with the belief system, like you can have whatever relationship with time you want. And I actually tend to admire people that are extremely structured and very organized, because they tend to struggle with that. But at least to choose a relationship with time that is empowering, again, that stops creating for us this sense of anxiety or guilt or shame, not necessarily because they're wrong per se, all emotions are valid, but because we don't create very wise things from there. When we're stuck in shame, or when we're stuck in guilt that we're late or whatever, we don't really function in our best way. We don't have our best ideas. We don't find much courage, etc. So, at least in my opinion, changing the relationship with time allowed me to understand how much power time had in nudging and deciding the way I would approach certain things. I don't know if it answered your questions. I know that it was more of a philosophical question. I definitely would love to know what you think of this.
I think it's a quite interesting one, but even in the way of each of us reflect upon it, in the sense that I was thinking more in the sense of the time needed for systems transformation, or even, and I sometimes explore it, how we have to rethink time, our own time for sure, but more in a kind of be able to synchronize it, for instance, with natural systems, because we know that nature works in a kind of have his own time, and sometimes in relation, for instance, to our designs, if could make it easier, and I believe so, to be able to understand nature, systems and cycles, respect it, and be able to organize ourselves in respect to that. So even transformation and change has its own pace. So
100%. 100%. And one final thing before we take more questions is that time, we tend to confront ourselves with time, right? As if like nature, time is separated and it's right there and we need to match it somehow or figure out, how your question was around how long does it take or how much time is needed for systems to change. And to me, every time that I ask myself questions like this, I go back and I think of the fact that it's not really about if we can fit or not in a specific time frame, but it's the relationship with our play to role that changes time. Like how long will it take? It's a byproduct of how much in connection with our own resources. How smoothly is it going? How are we approaching it? Do we see every step of the process as valid? And if some philosophies in the world that say that everything that we experience is sort of like a video game or a simulation. Matrix is one of the movies that the most put it on the big screen. But these are philosophies that exist since a much longer time. And they say that everything that we experience is for our own evolution and our own development. And so that life will keep putting in front of us the situations for us to understand that we're here to express ourselves, to express creatively in the side meaning of creation, like creating value or creating life or creating whatever, taking care, nourish. And so that the time of the process is and how long it takes, it really depends on how long do we take to understand that and to embrace that and to start decoding that language. So yeah, thank you again for your question.
And probably it is quite related to our society values, what is important, or if you have the ability to see it in time, because coming again to the forest roots, you will take a long time, not just one effort to get something strong. So I think
the bamboo that takes 7 years to root before you see anything over the land, but then it grows so rapidly because it spent 7 years rooting in the depth. And then in like a few months, it's super, super tall. Yeah, trees have so much to teach us for sure.
I love trees also, I must say.
Thank you again.
I have just one question.
Let me first ask Meg how long she can.
I have other 15 minutes. Thank you so much, though, for remembering that I have another event.
Yeah. 15 minutes, 2 more questions, okay? Yours and David ones, and that's it, okay?
Emilia, I didn't hear.
Oh, no, yeah, you can ask your question.
May I? One more?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm more scientific in the sense that I also am quite interested in understanding the impact and the value of social innovation projects. And one of the issues that I confront myself almost every day is, in fact, if we are looking for a paradigm shift and we are exploring to create and trying to find out and create new products with different impact in a way, do you think that we still that we already have the parameters and or indicators that are the right ones to the new projects that we intend to achieve?
I love this question so much because we are a culture that is obsessed with measurement and parameters and KPIs and stuff, and it's everything, right? It can be used in a way or another.
You use them, so that's
no. I wasn't judging this. I'm judging, yes. Or I'm talking about the fact that I didn't bore you with this today, but one very big branch of this sector is all about what's the best metrics or the best databases of parameters to define how something is impactful or not, which I find philosophically fascinating. Also not quite the point, but yeah. I would say that sometimes, back to what is valuable is what feels sacred. We have so much to learn from grandmothers and mothers and fathers in that sense. What do I mean by that? In the moment in which a grandmother wants to take care of food she's making for the rest of the family, or the mother or the father, or taking care of the nephew or the child, etc., we don't necessarily know or have a language to explain what are the parameters that we're looking at, but we know in other ways. And so I would love, if there is one thing that I can make right in my life and professional career, to go and reconnect with this other sense making that we have of how do we measure when something is going well, when something isn't going well. Some cultures have a very basic, yet it changed my life way, which is, does this situation or this project or this person or whatever relationship feel alive? It doesn't matter if it's in winter. If you like lean forward and get closer to this project, a project situation, it doesn't matter. You do something, like you move something. Does it feel alive? Just in winter, but alive? Or are you trying to revive something that just ended its cycle? Or another philosophy has, Karen Thompson has this other one that really is challenging, because sometimes we don't want things to end. Our culture doesn't do well with ending. Does it feel, the situation, this person, this project, when you think about it, when you're exposed to it, contracting? You feel contraction, like a sense of, which is dangerous for our system, because contraction sometimes triggers this warrior syndrome, like, oh, contraction, something compelling. Or does it feel expansive and peace-giving, almost like a sense of like expansion and hope, etc. And that's how you know when something is generative or degenerative. When for you, it might be generative for someone else, but for you it's intoxicating. It works with food, it's the same principle. So I don't know if we will ever get to the final, definite parameters. I do think we need to look for science, mostly because science is what allows us to navigate towards what it is for us and lay down with gratitude what it isn't. But not, in my opinion, get too obsessed with KPIs or these or who has the best metrics, because is yet again, and I'm sorry to repeat myself so much, is how you use them and what for, not necessarily what anymore.
Yes, but you have to communicate science, don't we?
Yes, and at the same time, we live in this very fascinating time in history where science is struggling because these other sciences or new sciences that are proving things that established science doesn't stand by. And so, as the Professor Emilia was saying, we might just stick with one of the biggest challenges and most transformative skills that we need to develop as a species, the capacity to hold the tension between opposites, the capacity to have conversations where we agree to disagree, but in a non-aggressive way, where we develop the capacity to enter the shoes of someone that stands for things that are radically opposite to the ones you stand for, and just experience it, not try to change it or nudge it or numb it or annihilate it or whatever. The capacity to understand that we might have as rich perspectives that we end up on opposites, and the capacity to hold those tensions between one another without feeling that we need to put them on a right or a wrong side of a line. Maybe our politics would be looking very different if we would crack that code.
I like that idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meg, first of all, thank you so much for the inspiring presentation. I think it matches a lot with the topic of the DDC that we have this year, that is transparency. Because I think you addressed the topic of social innovation and sustainability with looking, searching for transparency. We know that nowadays everybody is on sustainability, everybody is on social innovation, and most of them are there just because they want to pursue those values, their own personal values. We see this in every side of society, companies, politics, and even PhD students. Because sometimes they use sustainability just because they want PhD. And we have to be really clear now, and we have to say things as they are. My question now, imagine some years ago, when someone was doing design, there was this expression. When you don't have a good idea, you use a precious material. And then after, when you don't have a good idea, you put a plant. But this was drove society to look at sustainability just as an opportunity of their own, but not real sustainability. My question is, how do we evaluate transparency in sustainability?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay. Is it in people? Is it in organizations? I don't have a scientific answer for this, but I have one that at least works for me. So it works. It's effective, at least for me. How many of you, raise your hand, if you ever been in a conference, like an event, like the Web Summit, but where someone was talking about sustainability or some political speech or something related to a social cause? Raise your hand if you've ever been to one. Did it ever happen to you to hear someone saying all the right words and all the, checking all the boxes of the things they want to hear, but it doesn't shake your bones? It's just as simple as that. Like something can be extremely simple, extremely simple, like 2 lines, but it touches something in your fibers. And I know it sounds naive, but you also have felt people that maybe weren't that eloquent, but they're very present, or the way they would defend their point would speak of passion and coherence and integrity. That's how I navigate this space. When something feels contracted, when something feels somehow off, unnatural, and it's not even fake, because again, if someone like me that loves language, someone that is very eloquent can quite enchant me quite easily. But then it's literally something like, does it feel real? Genuine, coherent, like integrity is a word that I love, but it's also, unnecessarily like big as a word. It's really simple. Does it feel sincere? Because when you're sincere, you might be still afraid to be transparent, because we're triggered. Actually, the June newsletter is going to be on this. It's going to be talking about this, the declaration of your true coordinates. We are afraid of declaring our coordinates, even when we believe in them so strongly, because we fear the consequences. We fear that if we declare our coordinates, so what we thought, what we think or feel or believe about something, is going to cost us something, relationships, reputation, whatever, and it probably will. But it's also the only way for us to live in alignment with our essence, and therefore for our true allies to find us. If we don't declare our coordinates, they can't. And it's very tough. It's very tough. You can, in my own life, I can speak to you about, when I wanted to leave volleyball overnight, in the middle of a championship, top of my career, we were winning, and I declaring my true coordinates would have cost me my identity, because I was playing since 12 years, 3 hours per day, almost every day. My friends, my idea of success. I didn't have a pretty story to say. I just knew I couldn't continue playing because it felt wrong, and I didn't even know how to explain it because I couldn't explain it myself. Everybody has examples like this. So transparency is, to me, just the natural consequence of making peace with the fact that we can, in fact, tell our truth without having to override others. And then who tells the truth? You just feel it. And yeah, that would be it. Yeah.
I think you addressed the topic really well. And sometimes when we are very transparent, we lose a lot of friends, but we can say it a lot of friends.
Yeah, we can work on the style.
But we can say that's the one that stay are the best one. By the way, 100%. I think everybody would have the bone shaking today.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put an end to this lecture, and free you to go to your next conference. Okay, so Meg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was truly inspiring, and David said everything that expressed the feeling we have. And on behalf of YAP, again, thank you so much for accepting being here with us. And I'm sure that they will have more questions.
Yeah,
if
like,
you don't mind, I will
absolutely.
send it to you.
The email
will,
or like
get
just
in
reach out on Instagram or LinkedIn,
Right.
especially these 2 ones. If you write to me on Instagram on private, or also my email, absolutely.